Hi everybody, Andre Wicks here, and I want to welcome you to join me on this session called Trauma Invested Strategies for Secondary Educators. The basis of this session derives from the work of Pete Hall and Kristen Sowers, Relationship, Responsibility, and Regulation, Trauma Invested Practices for Fostering Resilient Learners. I am an associate for Fostering Resilient Learners, proud to be part of this work, proud to be associated with individuals like Pete and Kristen and the other associates. I know that this session will have value to you middle school and high school educators, so get settled in, grab a cup of coffee, a bottle of water, a snack. Have comfort in knowing that you don't have to wait for a bathroom break or a water break. Push pause whenever you need to readjust yourself and get comfortable again, or just to jot down some additional thoughts outside of the couple times that we do have planned for you to answer a few review questions, some thinking questions to really get you dialed into this work. So, let's see. Before we jump into the rest of the training, I do want to continue to introduce myself. I am a 25-year veteran educator, all in Spokane, Washington, but have had the unique opportunity, a couple unique opportunities. One that I've been an educator across all three levels of elementary, middle school, and high school, as well as a 3-year stint at the central office. My experience really has run the gamut of doing a lot of different things inside and outside the classroom at all levels, as well as having been a head coach for athletics. So I'm proud of the 25 years that I've had with Spokane Public Schools. Also, uniquely, I've had the opportunity to travel across the country from coast to coast, and all the way in between the northern and southern borders of the United States, working with individuals, schools, and school districts on matters of leadership, equity and diversity, trauma, and just in general, becoming your best self. So again, welcome. I'm excited for the content of this session. And like I said, I really do think that, I really believe that this will add value to you and your work. So this training applies to our goals around Tier 2 and 3 supports. So just note that. Okay, moving forward. Beginning of the session, I really like to emphasize the idea of continuous improvement. I've written on the idea of continuous improvement a number of times. I've posted on my LinkedIn. The idea of continuous improvement is all throughout my book, What's Standing in the Way. But I like to think of continuous improvement as evolution, not change. Although to evolve evokes change, but it seems like in the work that I've done, particularly in education, that the idea of change evokes some negative connotation, that if you're changing something, that whatever it is you're changing from, something must be wrong with it. And that isn't necessarily the case. Sometimes you're changing something because there is something wrong with it. You just need to come to grips with that. But the other reality is that if we're not evolving, we're dying. And that's just the case with all living things. Living things being human beings, animals, but in the school setting, anything that we choose to give life to is alive. That has to do with our day-to-day practices, our systems and protocols, our master schedule, all the things that we do and that we give attention to and pour resources into in the school setting have life. And because of that, there's also a natural evolutionary process that should be part of each of those aspects of your school. And if they're not evolving, they are dying. So that's the big idea behind continuous improvement, is that to improve, to get better results, you have to focus on getting better. And I know that sounds kind of silly to explicitly call out like that, but the reality is that I've seen it all too often that schools or a school systems or an individual or a business or an organization, when they fail to improve, it's because ultimately they have a lack of focus on improvement. So as we look toward tier 2 and tier 3 strategies for supporting ourselves and our students that have experienced trauma, we have to have that idea of continuous improvement. Let's see. Which trauma-invested strategies live within the idea of continuous improvement? All of them. Typically, we focus a lot of attention on the 3 R's: relationship, regulation, and responsibility. But really, all trauma-invested strategies live within this idea of continuous improvement. I'm going to be sharing with you several examples of what tier 2 and tier 3 supports look like on your MTSS system, or on our MTSS system, and what they could look like for you. And also share some strategies about how to best leverage those practices to help students become their best self. All right, I'll be moving my camera all over the screen here, just so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But 3 responses to all things education. Ultimately, there's a number of ways that we can respond to any given situation as educators, but I'm going to kind of break down the 3 for you here in just a moment. But when it comes to the quest for continuous improvement, we really have to be thinking about whether we're being responsive, reactive, or proactive in our responses. And depending on which we choose is going to have a direct impact on how we're able to effectively or non-effectively respond when students when they need us. So passive responses. It's important that I cover this now, because when I shared my examples with you, the experiences that I've lived at the tier 2 and 3 level of the MTSS system, I want to be able to refer back to these 3 ways of passive, reactive, and proactive types of responses. But for passive responses, we're looking at trauma-invested strategies for secondary educators. Really, we want to eliminate passive responses. Passive responses are the responses that really get little of our attention. It's like a non-committal kind of response. These kinds of responses don't necessarily mean that educators don't care, but they're really ineffective. They're not timely. Passive responses aren't necessarily connected to any sort of research or data to support whether or not that we should be incorporating that type of response. Next are reactive responses. This is when educators anticipate the effects of trauma and respond to those effects when they see them. And again, I'll be sharing examples of this, but just off the cuff, it's like, when you see something, you say something. When you see something happen, you respond to it, and you hurry and create an effective solution for that. Thirdly, are proactive responses. All right, and these are the types of responses that really we want to try to standardize in our education system. These are the types of responses that they require forethought. It's not just about seeing it and saying it, seeing it and responding to it. It's about anticipating, planning ahead, thinking with an evolutionary type mindset about how we can continue to improve our responses to trauma as they relate within the school system. But again, I want to emphasize we want to try and standardize these types of responses. So we want to eliminate passive responses, reduce the number of reactive responses, and standardize our proactive responses. Okay. Why identifying these types of responses, why identifying them matter, is because if we don't intentionally take time to examine how we're responding to a variety of different scenarios, situations, and stimulus within the school, if we don't examine it, the likelihood is that we're going to be kind of living in response mode, reactive mode, and passive mode, which is exactly where we don't want to be. We want to be living in proactive mode, in visiting reactive mode from time to time. But again, if we don't pay attention to how we're responding, we're going to achieve results that we don't want to achieve. Okay, before I jump into the different examples that I have for levels 2 and 3, I want to take a moment to kind of talk through 10 things that the brain requires to be healthy and ready to learn. All right, and this is an adaptation to this presentation, different than I've given it before, but I really felt like it was important to incorporate this into this learning for you now, although you may capture it in some of the other trauma trainings that you participate in. But for this, it's important for us to understand because when we unpack the Tier 2 and 3 interventions and strategies for supporting our students, we want to be thinking about why. Ultimately, the why behind everything that we do when it comes to trauma-invested strategies has to do with what the brain needs to be able to be healthy and to be ready to learn. So sleep, appropriate sleep, keeping in mind that the adolescent brain requires a lot of sleep, up to 12 hours a night. Breathing techniques and breathing is required for a healthy brain, being ready to learn. Laughter, it really is the best medicine, all right? So make sure that, for you and your students that you're planning in time for laughter. Obviously, diet is super important, not just for the sake of maintaining healthy weight and reducing the possibilities of habits that may lead to heart disease later in life, but for the simple fact that good food is good for your brain. It really does make a difference on helping to improve focus and stamina. Limited screen time. A bit of an irony now that we have experienced 2/3 of 2020 and almost half of 2021 behind a screen for the majority of our learning. But limited screen time really has to do with the amount of time students and adults spend on screen that isn't required. So thinking about the time that you spend on Facebook or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever the case may be, I really want to limit that. Teamwork. Obviously, teamwork is critical in the sense that it promotes collaboration, but it also is proven to increase results. Water, really closely connected to healthy food, really having just in general to do with nutrition. I know that I personally feel the effects if I don't drink enough water throughout the course of a day. There's the fogginess and the headaches that I get, super important for a healthy, ready-to-learn brain. Gratitude, just the sense of gratitude and the effect that it has neurologically and in the heart, physically. just the sense of appreciation and the readiness that a person has to just live the day, let alone be ready to learn. Challenge. If you're familiar with Dan Pink and his theory of motivation, really comes into play here, that the key motivators are the sense of autonomy, purpose, and mastery. The ideas of mastery and being challenged toward mastery is really, really important. And then lastly, rounding out the field is exercise. Exercise is critical for us having healthy brains. So again, these 10, feel free to zoom back. We're at about 15 minutes and 45 seconds. If you need to come back to this spot as you answer some reflection questions that we engage in here just a little bit later. Okay, so today I'm going to give you some grade level examples, system examples, class and advisory specific examples, and then an individual student example of how to support students at a level 2 or tier 2 and tier 3 level when it comes to trauma invested strategies. So trauma invested strategies for a grade level. This has been our freshman focus here at Shadle Park High School, has been one of our most successful interventions for both tier 2 and 3. And what's super critical for this, again, going back to that idea of continuous improvement, are these 3 questions. All right, I'm challenging you now to incorporate, to memorize and incorporate these 3 questions, really for whatever system that you're looking to implement, whatever protocol you're looking to implement, whatever data or indicator that you're looking at on a regular basis. These are the 3 guiding questions toward continuous improvement. You'll notice here I got the 10 things that need to be in place for a healthy, ready-to-learn brain. Again, just kind of challenging you to be thinking through those lessons. But when it comes to freshman focus, we had to ask ourselves these 3 questions. How much are we doing? How well are we doing it? And ultimately, is anyone better off? And isn't that the key question? If you're not asking yourself that question with whatever it is that you're doing, whether it come to bell schedule, whether or not you actually choose to use bells or not, we actually have foregone using bells for the 2020-21 school year, just because it reduces anxiety. But for everything that you're choosing to do in your school, the ultimate question is anyone better off because of the things that you're doing? And if you're not, you need to look at stop doing that, change how you're doing it, or something brand new. Okay? All right, so for freshman focus, obviously this is for our 9th grade students. It starts before they even come into high school. This has to do with our transition activities, as you'll see here, really partnering with our middle schools, Glover and Salk Middle School that feed into Shadle Park, connecting with their counselors, connecting with teachers. It actually goes even beyond that. At Shadle Park, we took a look at our entire feeder pattern, and we have strengthened relationships with even all of our feeder elementary schools, really just communicating what the culture is like at Shadle, the culture that we look to maintain and evolve over time. We looked at teaming within the school and beyond the school, teaming with parents and community, but also looking at teaming our teachers within content areas and also cross-curricular teams. We even went so far as to restructure where our freshman students attend class. At the high school, it's less common to kind of operate in neighborhoods within the school, but just knowing that the 9th graders are still so young developmentally and cognitively that we recognize the need to be able to team. And so we moved teachers and we moved classrooms to create mostly a 9th grade wing of our high school, just to reduce the interaction and the distraction that ninth graders will experience in school. We took a hard look at professional development, book studies specifically related to ninth grade success. We poured resources into the work done out of the University of Chicago around ninth grade success. We dove into research about ninth grade success. We really made sure that we tried to secure additional grant funding. We pursued a College Spark grant and a Gear Up grant that provided us a couple $100,000 to be able to support professional development, but also to support our systems of success, our celebrations that we did with students. These 4 check boxes are just among a few of the things that we did to ensure that our ninth graders were successful. Why? Because that's what the research says. I wish that I was the one that actually wrote this article. I'll summarize it. If ninth graders pass all their classes, they're much more likely to graduate high school. I wish I would have wrote that. I'd be a millionaire by now. But that is a reality, and it's something that I think lots of high schools have overlooked, to really emphasize not letting your ninth graders fall through the cracks. So important, so important. And in the 5 years, I'm in my 5th year now at Shadle Park, the class that our seniors now entered when I got here at Shadle Park, actually entering my 4th year at Shadle Park. And we're looking at potentially having the highest graduation rate that we've had in a decade. Over 90%, well over 90%, which is super awesome. Okay, answering the second question. How well are we doing it? All right, each one of these questions increases in a level of accountability, right? And so the first is just examining what's all the stuff that you're doing. Make a list. How well are we doing those things? Really is that next level of accountability where you have to measure numbers and percentages. Okay, we looked at attendance, behavior, and course grades. Okay, as our indicators, and we looked at that data every single week. I was pouring into that data every single day, looking how the needles were moving. But really, we felt like those were the data. We're really fortunate in Spokane Public Schools to have an incredibly robust data management system. It's called the Data Tools. And so we're able to, our Power School system, our grading system, and this Data Tools, they communicate with each other every single night. And so we're able to maintain accurate data on all of our students at any given moment. And because of that, we're able to create proactive responses to those things. We're able to create proactive responses if we recognize that, oh my gosh, we have students that are, they're in poor attendance, they're having poor behavior because, they're not being challenged, or because they haven't gotten enough sleep, or because they're hungry or thirsty, right? We're able to create those proactive responses more and more often because we're looking at how well are we doing these things. What was a result of how well we were accomplishing the goals? The staff morale actually improved. Well, why is that important? Well, we recognize that when staff morale is up, their interactions with students are more positive. We recognize that we had more staff at their doors greeting students in between each passing period. We have more staff volunteering to chaperone dances, to supervise at events, to work the chain gang at the football games. All of this really is interconnected. I say there's an interdynamic and an interdependent relationship between all of this stuff that we're doing and the staff morale. The last and final of the third questions, taking that level of accountability to the next level even, was anyone better off? And I'm happy to say that over the course of just 2 years, my first 2 years at Shadle Park, leading the Freshman Focus Initiative, we saw an increase of 20% students passing all classes. This is over the course of about a year and a half, actually, not just 1 year. But 20%, we went from 69% of students passing all classes the spring before I arrived, and about a year and a half later, it increased to 89%. Our goal was 90%. We were just short of 90%, but yeah, 69% to 89% in about a year and a half. Amazing, amazing results. And it all had to do with the fact that we were focused on continuous improvement. All right. You may be asking yourself, well, what does this have to do with trauma? Well, embedded within each of these strategies, like I said, this is why I wanted to have this graphic as a lens that you're looking through and thinking about when it comes to grade level type interventions and strategies, is because there is that interdependent and interdynamic relationship between our trauma invested strategies and the systems that we have in place. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and let you discuss. I'll put up on the screen another graphic that'll ask you to push pause. I'm not going to put a timer up. You can just pause it, or you can keep going and come back to it. Totally up to you. We're at 26 minutes and 30 seconds right now, and these are your discussion questions for you personally and or your team if you're doing this workshop, this session with other people. Does your school consider trauma associated with the transition from middle school to high school? Of course there's trauma. Every time there's a transition from one level to another, there's that level of anxiety. If that was the only thing, if anxiety was the only type of trauma that we're experiencing, it would be a reason enough to consider it. When it comes to the 10 things a brain needs to be healthy, are your most vulnerable students being served? Okay. The example that I shared with you, 9th grade success, the freshman focus, had this bullet in mind when we created that initiative and that system to be in place. 9th graders are, in the high school, your most vulnerable students. 7th and 8th graders alike, honestly, 6th graders too, if you're in a true middle school model. Middle level students are all vulnerable. Depending on the circumstances that they have going on personally, they may vary to a degree, but the middle school is like the Bermuda Triangle of the K-12 system. I've been there, I've worked it, I love it, so I feel like I can say that, but really be thinking about if your most vulnerable students are being served there. Question number 3, which developmentally appropriate trauma invested practices will help your school Are they equitable for all students? Okay, all students, and not just race. Looking at socioeconomics, looking at your marginalized groups that are underrepresented. And then lastly, key question for this segment, which strategies do you have in place that are passive, reactive, and proactive? All right, reach out to me after the session. I actually have a great article and a matrix that shows a number of categorized passive, reactive, and proactive strategies. Okay, push pause. Okay, welcome back. Second segment, looking at trauma-invested strategies for systems. All right, so how much are we doing? How well are we doing it? Anyone better off? Same 3 questions that we're asking, okay? So at the systems level, okay, not just the grade level, at the systems level, we're looking at the breakdown of Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Tier 3 practices. Tier 1 practices of the multi-tiered systems of support, really at our school we decided to call the Tier 1 practices rather than Tier 2 and 3 interventions are a little bit different. The practices really are the things that you're doing on a daily basis, day in and day out. These are the things that we have in place that we're practicing all the time. It doesn't require some sort of special diagnosis. It doesn't require that this student or this group of students have a referral. The Tier 1 practices are just a given, and they're applied to all students. So a lived vision. So many times the vision is overlooked. Are you living the vision of the high school? Are you living the culture that you talk about at the high school? Are you actually living it? Do you hear students talking about it? Do you hear staff talking about it? Do you see it being actively lived out in your school setting? Greeting kids at the door, knowing them by name, knowing their story, asking them questions. How was your weekend? What do you do? What's your sister and brother up to now? How is college going for them? Oh, how's your dad's new job? Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. Talking to your students and getting to know them. The big three for us: attendance, behavior, course grades, advisory, positive behavior supports, PBIS. These are things that are incorporated on a daily basis. We actually do have advisory every day. It's super fortunate. We feel like that we get to engage with our kids in a non-graded, non-academic, non-threatening structure that's put into place here in our master schedule. But again, something that is applied to all students every day. We're looking at restorative practices, social emotional learning curriculum that's actually built into our advisory curriculum. The restorative practices really having to do with repairing the harm that's done when relationships are ruptured. These are practices that we have in place. That if there's a student referral, whatever the case may be, that the restoration of that relationship is integrated into our daily practices. We look at providing snacks and other basic needs, toiletries if needed, deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrush, food. Every day, actually, when students check in, we check in students at the door. We meet them, not just at the classroom door. I'm talking about at the door to get into the building. We have administrators and counselors there that are greeting kids and checking them in. And when they come in, they have an opportunity to grab a breakfast. All of our students are getting free breakfast. It's amazing right now. But again, how much are we doing? How well are we doing it? Is anyone better off? Each of these things are examples of what we're looking at and examining on an annual basis, on a semi-annual basis, to see if we're having the kind of impact that we hope for with our Tier 1 practices. Tier 2 and 3, interventions. So these are interventions that would require a referral, whether it be an official or unofficial referral. You talk to your counselor, you submit a form, but these are the systems that we have in place to proactively respond to our students. We have small group instruction. We have peer tutors. Our LINK crew, we actually call it Highlander Helpers. It's our own version of LINK crew, but it's upperclassmen that are attached to 4 or 5 ninth graders. Those Highlander Helpers also provide some peer tutoring, but we also have designated peer tutors that help support the academics and social emotional learning for our most vulnerable students. We have access time built into our master schedule. We have a mental health therapist. We have achievement gap intervention specialists, Mr. Garza, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Williams, Miss Aaliyah. Each of these persons acts as another layer of support for our students that need them. And that need is really fluid. How students access our Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions has to be fluid. This would be part of the proactive planning that you have within your system, is that it's not cumbersome. That's one thing that was really important for us. And as we looked at answering these three questions, especially the second and third question, how well are we doing it and is anyone better off? We realized that because of a lack of fluidity a couple years ago, that we weren't doing our tier 2 and 3 interventions very well, and that our students weren't as good off, as better off as we would like them to be because of that. So again, the accessibility of your interventions needs to be on point. We have an MTSS specialist who routinely conducts assessments to help us identify students that may be in need of an additional tier 2 or 3 intervention. We have an ALE program, that's an alternative learning experience program. It is mandated by the state that we're accountable on a number of levels, but this is a system that we put into place in the 2019-20 school year that allowed our students that just were not successful in the traditional high school setting. Actually, each of our middle schools and high schools in Spokane Public Schools has an ALE offering that allows us to continue providing an education to students that may not be able to attend classes because they have to work or because they've had excessive discipline. We still want to be able to serve those students, and we do that through the ALE program. Then lastly, the MDT team, our safety and security team, and our student intervention team. I mentioned earlier about referrals and how do we, the fluidity of how we serve our students through our tier 2 and 3 interventions. These three teams are teams that meet on a weekly basis to identify, prioritize, and serve our students that need our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. All right. Woo! That was a mouthful. Hopefully you're sticking with me as we move into the next pause and discuss section of this session. We're at 37 minutes, 30 seconds. So if you want to pause that or come back to it, you'll know where it's time-stamped. These are the questions. Got 4 questions for this. Has your school committed the error of missing the boat with Tier 1 practices? I can tell you that one of the reasons why we pivoted to Tier 1 practices, things that we're focusing on a daily basis, is that without that intentional, proactive approach to identifying what are the Tier 1 practices that all students get every single day, is that Tier 1 issues that could be resolved at the first tier level were creeping their way into Tier 2 and 3. The problem with that is that we had more Tier 2 and 3 issues than we had the resources to be able to support because a lot of those things should have been living at Tier 1. So examine that. Is that happening at your school? And talk about how you might be able to pivot yourselves. Question 2, which Tier 1 practices can your school commit to on a daily basis? All right, you saw a number of the ones that I shared with you. Feel free to scroll back and review those again. But which Tier 1 practices does your school already commit to? What other ones can you commit to? Third question, are there structures missing that are preventing an effective MTSS system from giving students that experience trauma the support they need to be successful? Again, I talked about fluidity. That's a huge piece of being successful with your MTSS system. Does it take a week, 2 weeks, a month, or longer for kids to get the services they need? Or is it nimble? Is it fluid? So be thinking about that and talking through that. And then lastly, are your MTSS practices passive, reactive, or proactive? Be honest about this, okay? The more truthful and the more honest and transparent you can be through this whole session, the better off that you're going to be. So go ahead and push pause, and I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you've been able to take some time. I didn't give you a designated amount of time. Each of the two previous pause and discuss sections, I want you to be able to, this is a learn at your own pace course, and so you take the time you need. Maybe you're coming back to this point right now and it's been a couple days since you've tapped into this course because you needed more time. Maybe you're watching it all the way through and you're planning on coming back later. Whichever you decide is totally okay and completely up to you. I want you to be able to manipulate this course however you need to make it work for you. So we're jumping into the third section of this course, talking about trauma-invested strategies for individual classes and for advisory. Our weekly advisory. When I originally built this course, we had advisory once a week. We actually have advisory every day this week, but the weekly part of this example with advisory has to do with our curriculum. So we at Shadle Park and throughout the Spokane Public Schools District have implemented Character Strong as a basis of our social emotional learning. And just as a means of creating a strong culture within each of our schools. Character Strong has grade level specific lessons. We are in year 3 of implementation. We'll be fully implemented in one more year. But the great thing about Character Strong is that it's a nationally recognized curriculum. They have an amazing staff. The customer support is world class, and it is a well thought out, well vetted curriculum that has also been vetted by some Washington State experts in matters of equity to make sure that the curriculum is equitable as well. So if you don't have a curriculum, if you don't have an advisory, first of all, I challenge you as a school, I challenge you as a district, I challenge your school board, not in a negative way, in an absolutely positive way, that you really need to have an advisory built into your middle schools and high schools. It's absolutely essential to be able to develop the kind of relationships between students and staff and students to students in order to create the type of culture, the type of environment that really supports the kind of experience, the world-class experience that I think we all hope to provide for our students. Looking at our classes, we have a school-wide integration of advisory into all the classes. We have weekly challenges. They're called Character Dares. The cool thing about this, as it relates to Character Strong and how it connects to advisory and the overarching culture and environment that we're trying to create, is that these Character Dares have to do really with personal development. And really, isn't that what isn't that the goal of education? The goal of working with our students obviously is to teach curriculum, but ultimately, when our students graduate from our systems, when they leave middle school into high school and leave high school into the world, our goal really is that we've helped to shape and help move those youth along the continuum of becoming their best selves. We want them to be great people. And so Character Dares is an aspect of our Character Strong curriculum that targets the building of the foundation of becoming great individuals with character. We also look at bringing in guest speakers all throughout the year. We average probably anywhere from 5 to 10 guest speakers that speak on a variety of topics, but there's a red thread, all right, that I have to really call out here with the people that we bring on and bring into our building to talk to students and staff. That's all connected. It's all connected. It's all connected to our trauma-invested practices. Our trauma-invested practices are connected to our advisory. Our advisory is connected to whole child education. There really is this red thread that goes throughout, but also around, that ties it all together. So as you're looking at opportunities to bring in guest speakers, be thinking about every decision that you make. Again, going back to continuous improvement, every decision that you make, even as it pertains to guest speakers, should be amplifying, should be advancing, should be moving you closer toward continuous improvement in everything that you do. All right, lastly, trauma-invested strategies for individual students. This example that I wanted to share with you, this is timely because many of you probably experienced something similar, and that is the distribution of technology. And I wanted to use this example because of the current state that we're all in, the connection that I think we can all make was getting our technology out to all of our students. We recognize that the trauma that our students are experiencing, the hardships that our students are experiencing, having to do with social and economic barriers to success academically, are also impacting them socially and emotionally. And so we looked at what is it going to take for our students to be successful? Really looking back to last spring when we had school closures due to the pandemic. Do all students have access to technology? Do all students have access to internet and technical support? For our students that didn't, I organized a school-wide technology distribution. We checked out 900 laptops to our students to make sure all of our students had one-to-one access. Now, I realize that not every district is going to be able to have the resources to be able to do that. So, but what other low-cost, no-cost solutions can you think of that might be able to meet that need? I actually also organized a number of our support staff to deliver technology to individual homes, our families that don't have transportation. Many of our students rely on the bus to actually get to school, to get access to the resources. What happens if school's closed? What happens if the student is sick? What happens if, for whatever reason, they're not able to come to school? So we organized a porch visit type technology distribution. It really was all hands on deck, which was super awesome. So this, honestly, I would categorize as more of a reactive type intervention. There really was no way to predict or plan for school closure. And so we really did have to be as responsive as possible. So I share that example and call that out specifically just to note that not every response you're going to have is going to be proactive. You can't plan for everything, but for the things you can't plan for, be as reactive and as responsive as possible. Academic supports really had to do with streamlining communication, narrowing our platforms for resource and content delivery, and creating schedules that accommodate a variety of needs. So really looking at our students in the different ways that they're experiencing environmental traumas, particularly right now. There's a number of ways that we could be communicating with kids and families: text, phone calls, emails, through Teams, through Zoom, through Google Classroom, mailers, newsletters, electronic newsletters. We recognized that it was actually super challenging for our students and families to navigate and to manage all of that communication, which leads to the second bullet. We really needed to streamline that. So as you're thinking about interventions and supports and strategies for supporting your kids, be thinking about how communication plays into all of that and what's going to be the most effective, transparent, and manageable way for you to communicate and for your students and families to be able to communicate to you. Okay, another mouthful, and we're rolling right along. So I'm glad that this is a learn at your own pace course, because you may need to pause in between all of my talking. But like I said at the top of the hour, I really do believe this course is going to be super impactful for middle school and high school students, just to get some new ideas, some fresh ideas, to be able to move yourselves down that path of continuous improvement. The third pause and discuss before we bring closure to this session. Does your school see the effects of trauma as an equity issue? When I didn't call it out specifically then, I am now. Equity is embedded into the fabric of all decisions that we're making now. Just because we recognize that because of a lack of equity with transportation, a lack of equity with access, a lack of equity with finances and resources of our students, the pandemic has actually, in a strange kind of way, done a wonderful job of revealing the number of inequities that we had prior to. It's helped us to respond better to that. Second question, how is your school leveraging trauma-invested practices in the classroom and the individual level? Really get specific and granular with those as you examine that. As you assess your school's place on the continuum of trauma-invested practices, what are the challenges and opportunities? Okay, what are the things that you're struggling with the most? What's the connection between the challenge and the opportunity that you have to improve as a school and a school system? And then lastly, are your classroom individual practices passive, reactive, or proactive? Okay, and again, there's no need to be self-conscious about reactive because sometimes reactive responses are necessary. You need to be just nimble with that. But again, we want to standardize proactive and hopefully reduce or eliminate passive practices. So pause and discuss, and I'll be right back. Okay, next steps. This is critical, all right? This is your call to action here, folks. Got 6 things that you could be doing. Engaging in some district-wide PD. Check, you did that. You're doing it right now, okay? But this isn't the end. This is just the beginning for you. Buy a book study or form a book study and use one of Kristen and Pete's books, or buy my book, What's Standing in the Way? A little bit of a different take on how to get past your own trauma in order to become your best self so you can help others become their best self. Tap into the resources at fosteringresilientlearners.org. Book Pete, Kristen, or an associate like me to come work directly with your staff. Nothing like face-to-face interaction. Number 5, prioritize the needs of your students and implement trauma-invested practices that provide the biggest return on investment. How do you know which ones provide the biggest return on investment? You answer the 3 questions. What are we doing? How well are we doing it? And is anyone better off? The only way to prioritize. And then finally, continually reassess. Reassess the needs of your students in your building. Make adjustments where necessary. Okay? Eliminate passive responses. Reduce reactive responses. Standardize proactive responses. Okay, that's it, folks. Honestly, I really hope, and I really do believe that this session is going to add value to your work. You can reach me at andre@strivess.com. Reach out to Kristen and Pete, and that's a wrap. Andre Wicks checking out. Be great today.